Hello there and welcome once again to the Mayor's Magazine. I'm Mick Cornett, the Mayor of Oklahoma City. Glad you're with us. This is our show for October 2012. In our first two segments, we're going to visit with Oklahoma City's Congressman James Lankford. Welcome to the show, Congressman.
Thank you very much. Glad to be able to be here.
I say Oklahoma City. You represent about, 80% of Oklahoma City, I'm guessing?
Most of it. It's almost all of Oklahoma County, except for the area right around Tinker Air Force Base. And then, of course, Oklahoma, as you know well, Oklahoma City is not just Oklahoma County. It stretches into multiple counties around us. And so it doesn't include Cleveland, doesn't include Canadian, doesn't include Logan, but it includes Oklahoma County, Pottawatomie County, Seminole County.
Rounding up your first term, how's it gone so far?
It's been an eventful couple of past years, to say the least. There's a lot going on there. There are more things moving than people realize. I know the media narrative right now is nothing's happening, nothing's going on, they're just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. It's actually not true. Just the things that are passing are things that aren't all that sexy. And they're not the big thing, which is the budget. We're stuck right now. I'm on the House Budget Committee, and we passed a budget in 2011, passed on in 2012. The Senate is now pushing 3 years without pushing a budget at all, not even through committee. So not just to the full House, to the full Senate, not even through the committee in the Senate. So,
and we keep hearing we're headed toward this magical moment at the end of this year that could be a catastrophe from a budget perspective. Can you explain that to people who may not have been following it?
Sure can. There are a lot of things that are coming down the end of this year with the lame duck time period. And it's interesting. I have people say, that's the folks that are voted out. It's not necessarily true. You're elected for a 2-year time period, beginning in January, ending in the next 2 years later, beginning of January. So these are still the elected representatives finishing things out, even if they were voted out. But November and December of this year, starting the 13th of November, we have to settle all tax policies. A lot of folks talk about the Bush tax cuts and assume that's just for the wealthy. It's actually not true. The tax cuts of 2001 and 2003 were every single tax bracket, from the lowest all the way to the highest. Every single one of them got a cut. All of those go up. Starting January the 1st of next year. The estate tax, affectionately called the death tax, that goes up dramatically. The AMT, alternative minimum tax, it also skyrockets January the 1st, as well as a bunch of other taxes that kick in. So that's all January 1. If we don't stop it and can't stabilize our tax policy, it's automatically going to go up. And then the sequestration everyone talks about. Last summer, everyone loved the budget talks last summer and how painful and bloody all of those were to try to get some spending reductions. It was really a two-step plan. It was bring down some of the spending, about $1 trillion in spending, and then a year later there was going to be another level that was going to come down. If not, then there'd be automatic across-the-board cuts. This is the same as what happened in the late 80s, early 90s, when it's the same formula was used. But the difference is, at that time, Congress actually worked together and they got it done. This year, Congress has not been able to complete that. So there's an automatic across-the-board cut coming in all line items. And people talk about it being a huge defense cut, and it is. It's a 10% cut to defense, but it's also a 10% cut to FBI, 10% cut to Border Patrol. It's an 8% cut to all of our scientific research and medical research. It's a very significant cut across the board, unless we can get something done this November or December to be able to avoid that. And I'm not talking about just turning it off. I'm saying we can find the cuts more strategically rather than just have across the board.
In the effort to get closer to a balanced budget, certainly you can reduce spending, but you can also increase revenue. Where are you on trying to get to that middle ground?
There are a couple areas on that. One is you look at tax policy, which our tax policy is horrible. I've yet to run into anyone that files their taxes and says when they file them, I know they're right. Everyone files their taxes and thinks, I hope those are right. But you never feel like you really ever got it done right. 70,000 pages of tax policy. You're guessing, basically, when you turn it down. So the first thing we got to do is simplify the tax code dramatically. That happened 30 years ago. We're long overdue again to do a major simplification. And yes, that means removing the deductions. Most of those deductions are for high-income individuals. That's just the way they're written. So a lot of those deductions should go away and simplify it. But it should also bring down the rate. We're at 35% right now. That should come down for both business taxes and for individual taxes, not have such a high rate. So both those come down. We'd like to see a 25% rate be the top rate for individuals and for businesses. That's very competitive worldwide with how the rest of taxes are done around the rest of the world. So that's the right way to do it and pull out all those deductions. Now, will that mean some people pay higher taxes? Yes. But that was the same in the 80s during the Reagan administration when they did a major reform of taxes. Some people's taxes went up, some went down, some stayed about the same. It would be that same process again. We can't go in and try to defend every little deduction that's there and also say we're going to keep taxes reduced for everybody in that. But this is not a plan to go raise taxes. This is a plan to simplify the code. There's two ways to go after it, and one is a quick story I can tell you.
Sure.
Several years ago, my girls, when they were in school, their particular school, first grade and fifth grade, they always had a lesson on the Revolutionary War. And the way that they did it is the first grade and fifth grade did it at the same time. And the fifth grade really focused on the British side of it. And the first graders really focused on the American side of it. And about a week into it, the fifth graders would come over to the first grade class and they would impose taxes on the first graders. And they'd walk in and say, just randomly, they'd burst through the door and say, it's a penny to sharpen your pencil, it's a penny to go to the bathroom, it's a penny to get a question answered by the teacher, and impose all these random taxes. And then the next day they'd come in and add new taxes to them. And it was to depict the frustration of the people in the colonies about these foreign individuals coming over to the colony and imposing taxes. Well, what's funny is my first grader came home the second day and said, I need to take 8 pencils with me to school tomorrow. And we said, well, why do you need to take 8 pencils? He said, well, if I don't take pencils, I'm going to have to pay the tax on it. And they'd figured out a plan to all go to the bathroom at lunchtime when the fifth graders weren't around. And I laughed and I thought, they're first graders and they're figuring out how to avoid the tax. That's all they were doing, is trying to figure out, how do I avoid this tax? Well, there's this impression, if we'll just raise taxes on wealthy people, we'll get more money. That's not true. The wealthy people have the best accountants and the best attorneys, and they know how to be able to avoid the tax and how to be able to move it. The way you get more revenue is, as crazy as it sounds, is getting the tax rate at a reasonable rate, and so there's not this incentive to avoid it. That brings in more revenue. And it's a fight with people to be able to talk through that process. But when you see even a first grader understands how to avoid taxes if they feel like it's too high, you establish systems to say very few deductions, a reasonable rate will actually bring in more revenue. It's been shown to happen before. It's time we do it again.
Is the conversation ongoing, and are you involved in that conversation?
Conversation is ongoing. Yeah, the budget committee that I serve on, last April, most people focused in on the Medicare proposals and all these different proposals we had in the budget. But we had a section in the budget dedicated to tax proposal. That was fairly revolutionary in how we did it. 2-tier system, a 10% rate, a 25% rate for individuals, a top rate for businesses of 25%, removing a lot of deductions. We've already passed that in the House of Representatives, waiting on a counteroffer to come back from the Senate. Our hope is, after a full year of talking through that, if once we get past November, December, and get into the new session of Congress, we'll have hearings on tax policy from January to July, talk through all the deductions. We'll put all of them on the table. Let the American people talk about it, do full hearings, allow the noise of the American politic to be able to go through that. People may come back and say, you know what, no, I really want the second mortgage deduction for my home. And that becomes this big, huge issue about it. Well, okay, well then our top rate's not 25%, it's 25.5% then. But if we don't have that, then maybe it's 25%. And then there's this argument about where it all lies. And allow that conversation to be national and to be loud. And I think that's the way it should be done in America, rather than some backroom deal done in November, December. So best case scenario for me, extend all the tax rates for the next year, allow the nation to argue about it early next year, and let's get it done by midsummer next year.
Besides tax policy, what else will be going on in the December lame duck session?
Well, we've got to settle foreign policy. That's a big deal to a lot of folks in Oklahoma. The debt ceiling will also come up again. It is now due again. As we process through November, December, January, February, somewhere through there, we've got to resolve a debt ceiling. I have folks that come to me all the time and say, don't raise the debt ceiling, don't take on more debt, just live within our means right now. The problem is, that's $1 trillion cut in 1 year. What everyone's screaming about in sequestration right now, to say we can't do that, that will collapse our economy, is $100 billion in a single year. So to not do a debt ceiling means $1 trillion cut in a single year. Economically, we can't do that as a nation. Now, can we do that over the next several years? Yes, we can. We can get to a balanced budget, but you're not going to get there in a single year. And so the push right now is, how do we strategically work a year at a time? The way I compared 15 years ago, the United States had a car loan. We had debt, but it was not so overwhelming that we couldn't survive it. Now we have a jumbo mortgage. And the problem is we have a jumbo mortgage and very little income. And so we've got to be able to establish how we're going to bring this down. Quick comparison. You go back 5 years ago to 2007. The United States brought in $2.5 trillion in revenue. This year, we're expected to bring in $2.5 trillion in revenue. It's almost identical 5 years ago and this year. You go back 5 years ago, we spent as a nation $2.7 trillion. This year, it's $3.7 trillion.
Where's it all going?
Well, it is this dramatic increase in spending that's happened in the last 4 years.
Is it across the board, or is there one
across
specific
the board.
area?
When you look at the stimulus that was passed in 2009, that bill increased what they call plussed up a lot of those accounts. And it was supposed to be a one-year anomaly to say, okay, we're going to infuse the economy with all this new money for 1 year. The problem was in 2010, that same budget was passed again. And so what was intended to be a one-year anomaly has now become the standard. And now we're trying to push back our level of spending to say you can't increase spending $1 trillion and assume there's not going to be a consequence for that. So from 2007 to 2012, $1 trillion in increased spending every single year has brought us $1 trillion deficit. So it makes sense to look at it. So that's why I push back when a lot of people say, if we'll just raise taxes, we'll solve this. We'll say our tax income is the same as what it was 5 years ago. It's our spending that's dramatically increased, and we've got to address our spending.
Let me jump in and get us to a break. We'll be back with more of Congressman James Lankford when we return on the Mayor's Magazine.
In Oklahoma, the sights and sounds of severe weather are all too familiar. Do you know what to do when you hear an outdoor warning siren?
I'm Frank Barnes, Oklahoma City Emergency Manager. In Oklahoma City, the sirens sound to warn you that weather conditions may produce a tornado.
That's your signal to take shelter and seek information about where severe weather could strike.
And remember, an all-clear signal does not sound. Always monitor the weather conditions until the threat has passed.
Welcome back to the Mayor's Magazine. Congressman James Lankford is our guest for this second segment. We were talking mostly about the budget in the first segment. Transportation and infrastructure, you're on that committee as well. What's going on there?
I am. It's very interesting. And again, I'd mentioned earlier before, a lot of people say nothing's happening in Congress. That's not actually true. A big example of that's the transportation bill. We have a surface transportation bill and an FAA bill that's been passed in the last 2 years. And the reason that's significant, obviously with the FAA Center here, it's a very big deal to us in Oklahoma City. But there have been 23 short-term, quote-unquote, extensions of the previous FAA bill. And that even proceeds back into when Democrats had the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they couldn't get an FAA bill done. Same thing in the surface transportation bill. When I got there as a freshman, starting last January, there had been 6 short-term extensions of the bill for surface transportation highways. And we had just left a Congress that had the House, the Senate, and the presidency, all Democrats. And they had earmarks. We stepped in and banned earmarks immediately and said we start working on policy and make this very different. I ended up being on the final conference committee resolving the transportation bill between the House and the Senate and trying to resolve our differences. And it is remarkable what we were able to get done.
What are the highlights of that? What are the takeaways?
Well, one of the biggest areas we tried to push on was trying to get more local decision making.
I noticed that.
To have fewer decisions made in Washington, more than made by mayors, by local areas, by a state, and to say what can we do to expedite this process. A lot of the cost of construction is driven based on the length of time you have to get in permitting. So we included one thing, again, it's not very sexy, but categorical exclusions to say if this project costs $5 million or less, then the local folks can go in and evaluate all the different federal issues and sign off on it, rather than bringing a federal regulator to be able to examine those things and running through all the process. It's a smaller project that can be handled on a local basis to make the decision. Trust those individuals to make right decisions. They make them all the time for the people that live around them. They have to live next to that road. They have to deal with the consequences of it. They're the first line of defense in it. That includes about 80% of our projects that we do in Oklahoma. It's a huge amount of our projects in Oklahoma will not have to go through that federal process.
It takes away the red tape.
It takes away that red tape. It speeds up the process. Anyone who does construction can tell you if you can do it faster, you can do it cheaper. Because then you don't have to have months to be able to expect what's inflation going to be, what's the cost of the products going to be, is my labor going to be there at that time. So if you can remove all of that delay, you actually get to construction faster and it's cheaper to do it. That means more miles of road done faster with fewer delays. That's a pretty big deal to all of us that live around construction here all the time.
Right.
So that was one of the big pieces that we were able to win.
You know, we talk a lot in this country about deferred maintenance, and you know, we have some in the state of Oklahoma. But when I visit some of these large East Coast cities that, you know, that were founded in the 1700s and the 1800s, I see a lot of what looks to me like deferred maintenance, and you just wonder if this isn't some sort of ticking time bomb on America. And it might be up to the local governments and the states to handle it, but somebody's got to handle it. And I see a lot of things that look to me like they're underwater.
You do, and you see that. And an interesting analogy of that is Oklahoma itself. We deferred our maintenance to bridges for a long time. And we saw our bridges begin to deteriorate, and it became a big issue to us. And then suddenly, several elections in a row, you saw the election was about, what are we going to do on transportation and the bridges? Because the people of Oklahoma rose up and said, stop deferring that, let's do it. The same thing occurs in every other part of the country. That at some point they say, stop setting aside that needs to be a priority. And so we see issues in Oklahoma where the governor puts a high priority on clearing everything else out and say, we're going to fix our roads, we're going to fix our bridges, we're going to get that done. Well, it's a local decision that was made under the pressure that was done politically here. That can be done all around the country. We just need to trust those local folks that drive on the roads actually care about their condition.
You know, one other thing about the transportation infrastructure that perturbs me is I don't see enough R&D going into how we're going to keep the costs down. It just costs more and more and more to build a bridge or a road or seemingly anything for infrastructure. And I don't see any technological breakthroughs on materials or design that are, can cut something 20% or 50%. It always goes the other way, and it almost always exceeds the rate of inflation, and so you get less for your money.
Right, and that's one of the things, actually, what's interesting you bring that up, that's in the bill. The R&D section of the previous bills had this research, but there was no connection to reality. And so they would do research, and they would say, yes, this is cheaper, but there was no practical application on it. This one actually includes a section in our R&D budget for the transportation that moves it to practical application. So if you find a better way to lay asphalt, then we actually start laying it, let everyone examine it, and move from there, rather than in a laboratory they say, yep, that's a good idea. So we actually move it to practical application. Now, it's not a huge part of the budget, neither do I think it should be a huge part of the budget, because individual states and municipalities should be able to look at it, see the research, see that it's done, see how it was applied, and go, yep, that'll work, and apply it. But that we actually did start some of that process in this bill.
I'm grateful. You were in Tampa?
I was in Tampa. I'd say I had a unique thing, and this is the Republican convention that was there, but on Monday night before we actually started, I was invited to speak to the Tampa Economic Development Group. So it's a group of folks from all their business, folks from that whole area, and I was invited to speak there to talk about Oklahoma City and what's happened. And what was very interesting is Tampa is going through a process we went through as Oklahoma City 20 years ago, where they're looking at their city, they're looking at their infrastructure, they're looking at their convention center. And they wanted to bring the convention there to try to jumpstart some of the process of getting that going. But when I sat down and I told the story, so there were probably 150, 200 economic leaders of Tampa there, told the story of Oklahoma City and what's happened and the transitions that happened. Afterwards, their chamber folks came and visited with me and wanted to know the details of that, but said an interesting thing to me, said, we're visiting around the country to try to go to other cities to see how we can advance, but we're not going to go to Oklahoma City because we're not to that level yet. That would just be frustrating to us. And he said, Oklahoma City's been on our target list to go to, even before I spoke there. It's been on our target list to go, but that's too big of a jump for us to get from where we are to get to Oklahoma City's level. So we're finding some other smaller markets to go to first. And I smiled and looked at them and thought, that conversation would not have happened 20 years ago.
No,
we wouldn't have had people say, Oklahoma City's too far out there, we can't get to that level. We've got to find some other city that's an easier step for us, and then hopefully we can get to the Oklahoma City level in the days ahead. But it was a really good encouragement. And one of the things I was able to tell them was, this was not a single individual that turned around Oklahoma City. It was multiple people that looked in their community where their business was located, where their neighborhood was located, and woke up and said, let's get to work on it. It was not only the city engaged, and you're very involved in that, obviously in the mayor's office, and the MAPS programs and everything that happened, but it was also individual business owners that said, I'll take my street. I'll take the school that's down the street, and we'll adopt them, and we won't just send them money. We're actually going to go over and mentor, and we're going to help, and we're going to actually engage with a classroom. That's incredibly significant. And what is happening here that we think is normal, we'll find out when we get to other cities like Tampa, we'll find out that's not normal. Yeah. This is a revolution that is occurring for the revitalization of a city and of a community, that other communities do look at us and see us in the standard that we've set, and that's a very good thing.
People in Oklahoma City put the city first. You see business leaders putting the city in front of their business interests. You see political leaders putting the city in front of their political interests. And it's amazing what can happen when you have a lot of people, putting the community in front of their own needs, and you don't see that in a lot of communities. A lot of turf issues in other communities.
You don't, and you see areas of the city like where Cesar Chavez Elementary went in. It's this beautiful school that goes in, and then all the development that happens around it, and homeowners say, well, let me fix up our house, and we'll try to fix up our street. There are areas of the community that businesses that look down that have been run down that say, oh, we're going to repaint. And one or two of them do it, and then it just starts spreading down the street, and you see whole sections of the community that are like that you think, here's how a community turns around. Exactly what you said. You begin to care about what happens, and as soon as someone does it, it's very transformational.
Well, appreciate your work. Hope you'll come back on the Mayor's Magazine sometime in the future.
We're glad to do that.
All
Thanks
right.
for your work as well.
Congressman James Lankford, with a full workload ahead of him here as 2012 winds up. We'll be back with more on the October edition of the Mayor's Magazine when we return.
Did you know 1/3 of an average landfill is made up of packaging material? Why be part of the problem? Recycling is as easy as rinsing and throwing. No need to sort. Set out the little blue bin on your regular trash day. Now it even pays to recycle. Each week, one lucky Oklahoma City resident will win $100 just for setting out their little blue bin full of the proper recyclable materials. Be part of the solution. Start recycling today.
West Nile virus is spread by the bite of an infected mosquito. While most people infected with West Nile virus will show mild or no symptoms, 1 in 150 will get seriously ill.
I'm one.
I'm one.
I'm one.
And some will die.
Protect yourself against West Nile virus. Call your county health department to learn more.
Welcome back to the Mayor's Magazine. In this final segment, we're going to learn more about the Mayor's Committee on Disability Concerns. We have Pam Henry, who's the chair of that committee, and Jason Johnston, who's the parliamentarian. Welcome both to the Mayor's Magazine.
Thank you, Mayor.
Now, Pam, how many years have you been the chair of this committee now?
This is my 6th year.
6th year. And much has happened over those 6 years. What are you most proud of when you look back over the last 6 years and the steps that Oklahoma City as a community has taken to take on disability concerns?
I think something we were talking about before we started rolling tape, the emphasis on sidewalks in Oklahoma City. Of course, all of the MAPS projects are ADA compliant plus. And I will go to a meeting to monitor, members of our committees monitor almost everything that goes on in Oklahoma City. They're always ADA compliant, and I'm just thrilled to death by that. This city is so much easier to navigate than it used to be, and it's getting better every month.
And you guys are keeping an eye on that. Jason, what do you see for our Oklahoma City and the culture of the way we deal with disability concerns?
Well, I think as a whole, it's part of what we do as a society, and it is reflected by our concerns about being able to walk places, to get places, and we're dealing with people who are in one of the things we're doing is motorized pedestrians, which are people in chairs very similar to hers, and how they're getting from point A to point B, and keeping them safe and making sure that we do what we can to be safe from them, as it were.
We're going to be presenting the Clearing the Path Award on October 30th. What is the Clearing the Path Award?
Clearing the Path is based on universal design, which was a concept that came originally from the North Carolina, North Virginia, or somewhere in the South, and was adopted by Georgia as what they call easy living homes. And it really has to do with making a home that's completely accessible for anyone. And universal design is good for everyone, doesn't hurt anyone. It's mostly wider doorways, wide hallways, an accessible bath on the first floor, usually a master suite on the first floor. And all that together, for my generation coming along, makes things easier when it's not as easy to be mobile. And so we decided that it would be a good thing to award those people that were really looking at that when they were building new homes and accessible homes, and we call it Clearing the Path.
Are these home builders? Are these architects? What part of the professional structures are out looking at these
We
things?
actually design the team, the architect, the builder, the interior designer, and the end user, so that their work is acknowledged, and that hopefully to encourage them to do this in other homes. There are a lot of designers who just automatically do things like a roll-in shower as part of a renovation on a master suite, just knowing that if you had a broken leg from a skiing accident, you wouldn't have to worry about jumping over the curb. and it just makes life easier. The same things that affect a baby that's 6 months old affects someone who's 60 years old as far as curbs and getting over impediments in place. So it's really called Clearing the Path for good reason.
Mm-hmm. What's the future for this committee? What are you all looking at going forward?
I think we're going to continue on the accessibility issue. This committee was formed, and the original name for it was Employment of People, of Citizens with Handicaps, and now we say people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. And it still has that major emphasis. But for people to get jobs, all the buses in Oklahoma City are accessible. Mm-hmm. But if you can't get to the bus stop, then how do you go get a job? How do you tell a boss, yes, I'll be there Monday through Friday on these hours? So accessibility is really our number one concern. The ADA has pretty well taken care of buildings being accessible. I noticed even with the construction going on, there was a ramp for me to get into City Hall today, and I want to thank you all for that. But we have to augment the ADA with people being able to get to one of those accessible buses so they can get to a job and have a full, pleasant life. And just whatever concerns people mm-hmm. bring to us. We do some fence mending. The city's ADA coordinator, Paula Falkenstein, is on our committee. And we give her reports every month about people call in, they say, there's a sidewalk here and here, but there's no curb cut. And she gets it handled like mm-hmm. that. So we'll always be looking out for individuals, and we invite people to contact us.
In general, the original MAPS projects, your perceptions of them being friendly to people with disabilities?
They are fabulous. They are just fabulous.
That includes the sports arena,
the
canal.
Arena. I got to go through the sports arena on a special tour and go into the locker room and see Kevin Durant's locker. I mean, I got the grand tour. Everything is accessible. The special boxes, you'd have to pay $80,000 to get one of those, so I'm not going to be there. But they're all accessible, mm-hmm. just in case. Every single project is accessible.
And so with MAPS 3, you're helping us ensure that the new convention center, for instance, will be ADA accessible.
Yes, we sure will.
The improvements at the fairgrounds, the new grand plans they have there, as well as what's going on down at the boathouse.
That's right, everything. And we get to, members of our committee, we have about 35 people, and they're all volunteers. And we pick various things to monitor. And people monitor the river development, and MAPS 3, and this and that. I monitor the Parks Department, and I've had just great fun about the new Lions Children's Park down by Lake Hefner, where every piece of playground equipment is accessible. And things like that are going on all over the city.
That's remarkable. Mm-hmm. Come a long way, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Jason, what would you like to see the committee working on going forward?
Well, I think an emphasis still on just improving the quality of life for everybody with a disability, mm-hmm. and I think that we broaden that to a population. And I think the things that we do is we monitor things within the city. It's always good. Every now and then, everything is ADA compliant. It's fun to get up, raise my hand, and say, have you thought of this? Mm-hmm. So even though there are laws that protect everyone, it's nice to be able to be the ombudsman. Have you thought about this? Because quite often, though, wheelchairs are thought of as ADA. Well, there's hearing impairments and there's visual impairments. And I remember there was sandwich signs as part of a project going up, and I said, have you thought what that would be like if you were blind and that was where you were supposed to walk, and here was a sandwich sign? So maybe that wasn't a good idea. So I think that that's our role, is to still be the human element mm-hmm. amidst the law, and try to make a better city for everyone. I mean, 180 shows that. I mean, when you really look at all of that, as I was coming across the street, people who are visually impaired or hearing impaired really know where they are when they're at a traffic signal now, and they're given vocal instructions. And so it just kind of shows where we are as a city, and that we're continuing to really give the individual importance.
Jason Johnston, Pam Henry, thanks so much for your work on the Mayor's Committee for Disability Concerns.
Thank you for all that you do for people with disabilities.
And we'll continue to make that a priority in Oklahoma City. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next month with another show.
You're watching City Channel 20, a public service from the City of Oklahoma City.